This is Tiffany Rosier, the host of the Afros and Knives podcast. We use the Anchor podcasting app to create and distribute the show. Creating a podcast on Anchor is effortless. It allows you to record a high-quality podcast and distribute it everywhere, including Google Podcast and Apple Podcast. They distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard everywhere. You can easily make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. No fancy equipment or podcasting experience is necessary, and it's 100% free. As long as you have a story to tell, Anchor is the platform to use. Share your story through audio using the Anchor app for Android, iPhone, or your desktop. Download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started today. Welcome to the Afros and Knives podcast, the interview series that elevates Black women's profiles and stories working in food and beverage, hospitality, food justice, food science, and food media. I am your host, Tiffany Rosier, and this week's conversation is with talented chocolatier and owner of DC-based Petite Soeur, Ashleigh Pearson. Ashleigh has done time in kitchens in Paris. She has spent time at the French Laundry, Marcel's in DC, and Per Se. Her shop in DC offers beautiful and delicious chocolates and confections, and those are available for delivery or available locally. So definitely hit up the website and order us a box or 2 or 3 or 5 for yourself or for a friend. She was just so gracious and generous during our conversation, and it was an absolute pleasure to chat with her. I'm definitely adding chocolates from Petite Soeur for my gift guide this year. And as I've been turning over an idea of a gift guide in my mind, I decided I wanted my gift guide to be less about holiday giving and more about figuring out how to be generous all year. And yes, generosity is more than just physical or tangible gifts, but sometimes there are moments that giving something tangible or physical is the best way to go. So as I pull this gift guide together, it might be released around the holidays, but it's just something that you can hold on to all year. And when you kind of are thinking of someone or just want to send them a quick thank you, or I'm thinking about you, and it can be anybody, you can turn to the gift guide and find something from a Black-owned business and send something out. So that's that gift guide situation. That's where that's headed. And speaking of gifts, I had another thought about a cookbook to put at the top of your list for gift giving, and that is, if you haven't heard of it and you've been living under a rock for the last year, is the brilliant collection of recipes by Toni Tipton Martin in her book called Jubilee. And a quick congratulations to her for becoming the newest editor at Cook's Country over at America's Test Kitchen. Well, actually, it's more like congratulations to Cook's Country for having Miss Martin at the helm. She is an absolute gift. And if you haven't gotten your copy of Jubilee, I don't know what you're waiting for. It's more than a cookbook. It's history. She brings some of the unsung masters of American cooking into your kitchen through this collection. The dishes are evergreen. They never age, and they always have something new to say. They're always fresh. So be sure to get one for yourself and then send one to a friend or a family member who loves to be in the kitchen. Actually, you know what? This book actually will, if you aren't one to be in the kitchen, you don't necessarily like to follow recipes, this is actually one of those books that work for just about everybody on a lot of cooking levels with a lot of different cooking interests. So again, it's ideal to go at the top of the list of any type of gift giving you might be doing in the next year or so. I want to give a huge shout out and thank you to the Afros and Knives patrons for their support. None of this would be possible without you. To become a patron, be sure to visit my Patreon page. It's patreon.com/Afros and Knives. If you love the podcast, of course, be sure to follow, subscribe, share, and comment. It definitely makes a huge difference, more than you know. And yeah, so that's it. I'm going to get out of here with this intro, and you guys can listen into my conversation with Ashleigh.
My dad's from Baltimore and my mom is from Washington, D.C. So I grew up actually in Baltimore. And then as an adult, I moved to D.C. where my career got started. So I started off at a restaurant called Marcel's in Washington, D.C., my first restaurant kitchen. And I walked in basically totally green as a biology college student. And I knew that I wanted to bake for a living. I just kind of never had the courage to say this is what I wanted to do, but I'd come to the realization in my life that that's what I wanted to do. So I kind of walk into this restaurant super excited, and I just kind of go to the chef and say, I want a chance to work in a kitchen. And he says, well, what qualifications do you have? And I said, well, I'm a biology student, so I can follow directions. I've done great in chemistry labs, and I feel I will be well suited in a pastry kitchen.
That was ideal for sure. Oh man, go ahead.
He's looking at me a little crazy, but I'm like, you can see it here. I got an A on organic chemistry, and I think I'll be a match. So he gives me an interview with the pastry chef the very next day. The pastry chef says to me, you know what, this is not going to be like Food Network. People come in here and think, you're just going to kind of turn it on and you're going to be great and it's going to be a fun environment. It's not going to be that way. And he says, I'll give you a chance, even though you shouldn't work here at a restaurant of this caliber. But if you can last for 6 months, he said, I could use the hands. So fine. I said, okay, I'm coming into all of this, mind you, with my one little baking champion belt from my church picnic, thinking, if I won the church picnic at my church.
You got it locked down, man. I mean, if you can handle like a church critique, you're in good shape. You are prepared for kitchen life for sure.
Yes. If I beat out, the Deacon's strawberry shortcake this year.
Really, absolutely.
So anyway, so he gives me a shot. And it was very difficult, obviously. But it turned into actually a very long and lasting working relationship. I became one of my first mentors, Chef Kujala, the chef there. And I'm still kind of affiliated with that restaurant today. So that was 10 years ago. While I worked for that restaurant, I started as a pastry cook, worked my way up to a pastry chef, and also kind of a corporate position where I was helping out at all of the restaurants. There's a group of women who come to the restaurant often. They're called Les Dames d'Escoffier. They have the DC chapter.
Know them well.
Yes, I had no idea. I'm still very green at this point. And at this point also, I should mention, I've never been to culinary school. I'm just learning in the kitchen, kind of taking in everything day by day. And the ladies come in, they said that they loved the dessert and they wanted to meet me, and they encouraged me to apply for their scholarship. So actually, a year later, I ended up applying for their scholarship, and I was awarded the scholarship, which kind of led me on my way to Paris. And I attended Le Cordon Bleu in Paris for their pastry program. And that really was kind of the point where I was like, okay, well, this is kind of where I go from here. So from there, I spent a total of 2 years in Paris, came back, decided to work with Chef Thomas Keller at Per Se. That really kind of gave me my foundation in chocolate making, and now I'm at my own business.
Wow. I mean, Chef Keller, that's definitely for all of the current attitudes towards, the very white male dominated space at this point. Chef Keller still is the guy that you definitely, if you end up in his kitchen, I'm sure you're surrounded by a lot of other talent besides himself. And so, yeah, that's definitely ideal training ground. If you can't go to culinary school, stage your way through a couple of really good kitchens and you should be in good
Absolutely.
shape. I
Yeah,
always
absolutely.
exactly. I'm like, I went to Le Cordon Bleu in Arizona, and that was
Yes.
always the split of conversation. Like, I had instructors who were like, "Yeah, you should do, you should go to school, absolutely," and then you had other instructors who were just like, "Yeah, we're teaching you stuff, but it's nothing you wouldn't have learned over some time working in a kitchen." So I always tell
Right.
people when they ask, like, "Should I go to culinary school?" I'm like, you know what? I think if you can get some work experience before culinary school,
Yep.
it's a better preparation, because then you'll realize what you're not learning in culinary school you're already learning on the job. And so by the time you're done with the education process, you've had so much more experience on the other end that you can now put those two things together. So
A
I'm like,
thousand
if you
percent.
can, I'm like, if you can do it, like, work first then school. But um I know
People
how hard
often
that is.
ask me, absolutely, people often ask me the same question, what should I go to school, or should I stage in the kitchens, or and I honestly think that, I worked professionally in the industry for about 4 or 5 years before I even went to culinary school. And
Yeah.
I felt very accomplished, and I felt confident in the kitchen prior to my culinary training. And I think that my work experience allowed me to get the best out of my school experience. There were some people in my class that didn't have a ton of actual hands-on kitchen training, whereas I had the kitchen training, so I could ask the question for the next level. Okay, chef, I see you doing this, but why, might you be doing that? Or how else can I apply that technique to this application? So you kind of get more out of it.
Wow. Yeah, exactly. Precisely. And it's such a, like, it's such a really great point to make, is like, firsthand that being, having that experience behind you and being able to get into a classroom and, like, kind of dig deeper on those skills that they try to teach. Because it's, I tell people, I'm like, culinary school is just kind of you resting very lightly on each topic. You really don't get any
Mm-hmm.
kind of, like, deep dives into a lot of things. So if you are already working, you can definitely take that life experience and come to the classroom with, like, hey, we've done this. I see what you're doing there. Can we dig a little deeper? And that, I mean, that's
Mm-hmm.
just to the benefit of everybody in the classroom as well. So
Absolutely.
to, like, your education, that difference between, like, I guess, because most people, when they think either pastry chef or like baker, they unfortunately they've now somehow managed to make it go, oh, that's women's work, that's girls' work. So it's not as serious. It doesn't take as much technical skill. And I'm just like, that is such garbage. I'm like, women who work in food, specifically pastry and like baking, you might as well say they're working in STEM, because
Yeah.
that science and technology angle, like, it's super strong if you decided to do that. And if they're honest with themselves, because I remember when I worked in my first kitchen in New York,
Mm-hmm.
I got the very distinct impression that the reason I ended up doing pastry is because no one else wanted to do it, had the patience to do proper measurements, and to be as precise as they needed to be to get consistent results.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't so much that they thought, oh, well, this is simple, and so, we're going to leave it for, like, the only woman in the kitchen to do. I felt
Mm-hmm.
like it's the exact opposite. It requires a tremendous amount of patience, and as well as skill, and then a little bit of instinct that they just don't possess. And so, this is why I ended up doing it specifically. So with your culinary education, how did that differ, like that traditional culinary education, differ than your training for, like, becoming like a chocolatier, like really kind of honing in on that particular skill set? Like, did you have to tap into, like, some new spaces in your brain? Did it make sense because you had, like, studied, like, chem and bio, and it was like, no, this makes sense, like, there's a chemistry to chocolate, it's it's easy.
Definitely. Well, I using the word easy even to this day.
Yes,
I'm like,
relative.
chocolate is super fickle. You have to just kind of wrangle it in at times. But I think that I've always taken the approach that cooking, and I say cooking, but I think it also applies to pastry and baking and chocolatiering. It's all about control. So that has been something that very early on I realized that cooking, baking, pastry making, and chocolates is about control. So if I can have this idea that I can control the atmosphere, or cooking temperatures or ratios, well, then I have room to kind of use improv and play and do things like
Mm,
that. I found that my formal training, I do rely on that at times for my chocolatiering now, but particularly all of that really came out of my time at Per Se. And I do draw on obviously the science background because chocolate's very different. You have to prepare your medium before you can even begin to work with it. So you have
Mm,
this product that's completely stable. You have to completely destabilize it, then completely restabilize it, and then you can begin to think about how you're going to add pastry elements. But you can't even begin to think about what you're going to fill your bonbon with if you haven't controlled your chocolate. So
wow.
if you don't understand concepts like, latent heat of crystallization, you're going to say, hey, this chocolate was perfectly in temper, but it sat at a room temperature a little bit too long, and now it's completely ruined. It's
Oh,
completely bloomed. So it's just knowing all of these things, and I had to read a lot. It's a lot of science and it's a lot of reading, but I kind of love that. It's kind of
wait.
my thing. I'm like, oh yes, I'm like, reading it like it's a novel. I've always been that way. My family, we just kind of love science in general, so it's kind of natural for me.
That is like the one thing I always try to push in conversations with like interns that I might have had or students or like parents of students who's like, oh, my kid wants to be in food or they want to work in food. And they always try to like either discourage them from doing it or they don't know how to
Yeah.
steer them in a way that is that pairs well with like their natural abilities or their natural interest. And so like
Hmm.
for me, I'm like, does your child like science and technology? Do they like working with like the biology of something or the componentry of something? And they're like, well, yeah, they like taking things apart. I'm like, and then I always steer them towards like pastry and chocolate making
Hmm.
because it requires that kind of mind. The ones who like to like riff a whole lot and they don't really like to follow any particular type of like rules or structure, then it's like this is going to be challenging because you don't
Yeah.
have a natural inclination to like want to work within that. But I also have found in my time in my experience that having
Hmm.
that kind of like rigid structure actually allows me to be more creative because I have like
Exactly.
and like there's a set of rules that apply to like this foundation, and then from
Spot
there
on.
it like I can feel secure in my creativity because I know like I can always fall back to the science. So as far as like transitioning from like working in restaurants into like what was the catalyst for you to like start your own business? What was the thing that said, okay, it's time?
Well, when I was writing my scholarship for Le Dame d'Escoffier, they asked me like, why? Why? I mean, because you could have done anything with it. They're like, why do you want to do this? Why do you want to go to Paris? Why do you want to? And I said, I want to go other places. I'm someone who's been from a specific place, and I basically have never left it. And while that was great, I said, I want to go out. I want to see what else is out there. I want to experience other things. I want to also, while doing that, solidify my technique because I don't want my technique or lack thereof to be the reason why I can't tell my story through my food. I don't want to have marred techniques that kind of confuse my message. So I said, while I'm here getting more technique, I want to experience other cultures. I want to add to my story, which will add to my plate. But I told them I
Mm,
wanted to bring all of that back home. I want to go just so I can come back and bring it back to my hometown. That was the most important thing to me. While I've always worked in restaurants, I felt after getting the chocolate experience, I just felt so compelled to focus on the chocolates. And I realized that was going to mean right away, I won't be in restaurants. I'm going to kind of have to
wow.
take a step back, and if I'm going to have my own concept, it's going to have to be very small, very focused. Therefore, I'm going to focus on one area and one thing. And I said, how do I right now want to tell my story? What's the medium that I want to use? And I decided on chocolate because I felt that I could say so much in one bite, and I could have so many different bites that could really give a clear idea of my story and what I wanted to say and how I was going to bring back all those experiences to DC.
Wow. That's that's I mean that's anybody who has to like process their like next move, that for me that level of like self-awareness and introspection is like necessary, like to know
Yeah.
like, okay, this is my life, this is who I am, what is the best thing to express that to the rest of the world? How can I like talk to people without talking to people and they know exactly who I am and understand like my worldview? So that is like that's such incredible to do. And again, like people look at food and we're often not encouraged to look at how thoughtful that this work requires you to be. You really have to take in consideration so many other things outside of just like the execution of the day in front of you. Like there's, especially career decisions in the climate that we're in right now, specifically, like where you don't know if certain restaurants are going to remain open, if you don't know what parts of the
Right.
industry will survive. And I think, being working in this field, you do have to have a tremendous amount of like introspective work that you engage with and go, okay, why am I doing this? Because like if I take it seriously at all, I know that feeding people is serious work and I want
Yeah.
to be able to simultaneously express myself and definitely give someone like something delicious to eat, but at the same time like that relationship that you've built with a diner, even if it's just a few hours long, you are really trying to communicate with them through what you serve them.
Absolutely. You're
So
trying to
it's
communicate. I mean, and part of you naturally, I mean, I think that if you truly love, serving food and serving people and being in the hospitality industry, there's a part of you that's like, also a nurturer. So you're trying to get so many components. I mean, you're thinking about, how you can tell your story, your personal story, how you can nourish someone, how you can do something that's visually appealing, how you can do something for someone or make something that's, giftable in my industry. So all of those things are kind of working together. And I know for me that wanting to kind of tell my personal story definitely meant removing myself from somebody else's establishment just for the time being.
mm, good. Removing yourself from somebody else's so you can actually.
Because because I constantly found myself, even though I really enjoyed working for the chefs that I worked for, I constantly found myself saying, okay, this is what I want to make. These are the ingredients I want to use, but how does it fit into their concept? How can
Mm,
I'm constantly editing. And I said, I have this idea. I want to create this thing. But I know, for example, Chef Keller doesn't like chocolate with red fruits, so I can't make that. So you're kind of
wow,
thinking,
wow.
how can I just, for lack of a better word, just do me for a minute? How can I get that creative
Right.
release? Because sometimes you're also kind of an artist, you just want to say something and without it being censored or disrupted. And I kind of joke now that I make this bonbon. It's a black walnut bonbon, and it has 3 layers. It has maple jam, black walnuts, and it has a black walnut ganache. And it's really tied to a cake that my grandfather used to make. So I took the inspiration of that cake that my grandfather used to make, that my dad makes, that I wish I would have, actually paid attention to them when they were making it. But, I kind of think back to, that memories of that my dad would always share with me. And then, you bring in kind of this aspect of things that I learned from per se. And then all my bonbons are hand painted. So I just said, what do I want this to look like? Or how does this kind of emote into a hand painting on a bonbon? And then you have a piece of chocolate that says all of those things. It says, my training from Paris. It says my time at per se. But ultimately, it speaks to my family's personal traditions.
Wow. That now that which is for me a great segue to understanding like tell me a bit more about like your creative process. Like how do you approach a new bonbon? How do you approach a new project? Like what are the things you kind of look for as far as inspiration, and then like what's your kind of your technical approach to like getting that to the finish line?
So for the most part, for inspiration, I mean, it can sound silly sometimes, but I look at anything from like graffiti. I look at, sometimes like, we have the cherry blossoms here. I could see a color inspiration kind of anywhere. I saw this image the other day and it was a graffiti. And I said, oh my gosh, those colors are so beautiful together. And I kind of
Hmm.
take note of that. And I think about how I want to translate that. And then often sometimes it's just a matter of, okay, this is the season, it's this time of the year, we're going into summer, so I want to keep things bright, I want to keep things fun. And what's in season right now? Okay, I'm going to use this ingredient. Or I was able to get some, Harry's berries. Okay, so this is going to be strawberries, so let's go into reds and pinks, and or something speckled, or we can be literal and make it look like a strawberry. Or I can kind of
Mm.
play around and just make it look like, anything that's on my mind. The creative freedom is just kind of awesome because it's basically just doing whatever comes to mind. So really inspiration comes from seasonality, time of year, and artwork in DC.
All right. Do you have any, do you typically get like requests for something specific that you or will kind of, oh yeah, you know what? Let me spread out on that a little bit. Let me see what else I can do. Or do most people just kind of walk in and go, I have no clue. So I'm just going to trust your judgment and you tell me what I should do and I will do that.
So most of my clients, they've known me for some time. A lot of, especially my wholesale clients, restaurants that buy my product, and they're basically just like, okay, we know you. Just do whatever you want, because they know that's typically where they're going to get their best work.
Right.
Is when I just kind of just do whatever I want. And I know I have even a floral client right now, and I told them, I said, hey, every single time you get your bonbons, it's very possible they're going to look different, because I just kind of paint based on my mood. And everyone's like, oh, I love, that's cool. Fine. Sure. Let's go with it. I'm like, okay, I'm still getting away with telling people that I'm just going to do whatever I want every time. And they trust you, because they trust that at the end of the day, they're hiring you because you respect the process. They know it's going to be beautiful. They know the style of your work. And so they just trust you. The only time where there's okay, it has to be this color or this range is when you're dealing with weddings, which is a whole nother kind of realm of, I need this shade of pink, or I want this shade of blue, or this, and then you kind of, respect the client's wishes and make it work for them. So.
Okay. Sorry. I'm so sorry. My
Okay.
internet is
No
just
worries.
like, I'm watching the signal thing like go on and off. And I'm like, what is happening right now? Why are you being. And so finally, like, because I try to connect to Wi-Fi for like just for signal strength. And now
Yeah.
it's like, oh, we're just going to be a regular cell service. So good luck with that. I'm like, thanks, guys. Thanks.
Regular cell service. Wish you the best.
I was like, you're going to be just fine. I'm just like, yeah, I feel like Katniss Everdeen right now. Thank you so much for that. Anyway, thankfully, and thank God for editing. So I was
Yeah.
like, I get to edit around this thing. Oh, wonderful. I was asking you about your like inspiration and all the things, and we were talking about the okay. Um, I will just skip ahead and I will work through whatever this edit sounds like later on.
You.
So for your like so starting your business and like what you've named it and what your intentions were behind that. Just talk to me a little bit about like where the concept for like Petite came from, and then I know you wanted to bring all of those things, your entire story back to DC and like tell your story through chocolate that way. So why like the brick and mortar, and why why, like I said, why the name, and when did you start your business and what were your plans for it, and has it grown in a way that you expected or planned?
So my business right now, it's called Petite Soeur, and that just means little sister in French. And I kind of joke that even at my age now, I'm 31, and my brothers still say I am their little sister. So it's just
Wow,
kind of,
guys.
yeah. It's just an identity that I've always had. So I just was like, you know what, running joke in my family. Well, let's just go with it. So that's how I named the business. It's still very early in its stages. So I actually just got everything going in October.
Wow, that is new. Okay, go ahead.
It's completely it's a startup. It's still very early, so it's brand new. Started in October, and then the pandemic hit right after my holiday season, right after basically Valentine's Day, and I've had to completely shift. So my original concept to start was just working with wholesale clients. And that was going very well. Just basically supplying restaurants, doing events, supplying floral shops, other people who wanted to have regular chocolate deliveries. And I realized that post the pandemic, I really had to kind of pivot and work on getting more product direct to customer. So my business is actually housed within the first restaurant I actually worked in. So
Wow.
it's very full
Okay.
circle. So the first restaurant that I was telling you that I walked in with all that courage as a young bio student, I actually rent space from them, and my business produces and works out of their space. So now I just managed to kind of pivot. I tried to start a website where I did some pop-ups just for Mother's Day and Father's Day, and just to kind of wait until things kind of blow over and then kind of looking for next steps. But definitely just starting the business, I felt, was the right step after leaving per se, just in order to kind of bring things back, in order to just kind of get out my own products. So
That's I mean, that to have to pivot that soon, it
oh boy.
will I mean, it'll absolutely give you a new set of skills on, like, how to be flexible in a very weird economy, and will make you force you to be more creative about, like, how you're delivering the service, how you're delivering product to people, how you're communicating with, like, even potential new customers. Because 'cause I'm like, I tell people, while we are absolutely focused on all of the people who have lost their businesses and who have lost jobs and, like, the challenges economically in that space, there's a vast majority of people who are just, simply working from home. Their work transitioned, very quickly and easily. Some businesses were able to, like, furlough their employees or continue to pay
Yes.
them. And, like, so not everyone has, like, suffered in this way. And
Right.
so to, like, keep your eye on, like, the prize is like, okay, well, this is not going to be forever. So I need to figure out, like, how does this look later on? And if anything was to happen at this level again, in this where it affects large numbers of people, and specifically the business that I do, like, how quickly can I change everything over? If that ever happens again, I think that was,
Absolutely.
a lot of people are really thinking about the immediate, and I'm just like, guys, anything can happen, not just a pandemic, a war, like, just anything can happen globally that will shift your business, and you have to be able to,
Absolutely.
like, have a plan in place. And I don't think we've ever had to have, like, an emergency
No.
plan for, like, an entire industry. And it's like, it's so obvious now that we should have, but, like, come on, like, we weren't
Yeah.
thinking about that. We were, like, literally thinking, like, day to day, trying to keep ourselves open and functioning and, like, creative and enjoying our work. So that's definitely a testament to you, though. Like, I mean, instead of, like, throwing it in, because you definitely could have, like, I mean, October is not a
Oh
long
yeah.
time. And you could have been like, you know what, forget it, the universe is saying shut
We'll
her
just take a
down.
pause. I'll just,
Yep. Like, I'm not doing this. I'm leaving. It's expensive to be here. I'm getting out
so
of here until
expensive.
someone tells me otherwise. But to, like, stick it out for sure is definitely requires a certain level of, like, strength and wisdom and absolute planning. So
I mean, it definitely made me realize, I mean, I had to ask myself really, really tough questions very early on. And I said, okay, well, what am I going to do? What's the end goal? And how can I continue to focus on the end goal during this? And I realized I had to completely restructure my business and the way that I was going to do business. So the biggest thing I learned from this is that before I kind of move into the space where I really want to just have a storefront and get the chocolates directly to people, I really want to make sure that there's a foundation for my website and the online business. And so the importance of having the ability to ship to customers in the event that people can't come to a storefront or they can't come to me directly, still being able to get product to them. So it's definitely made me think about how I'm going to move forward in my business, how I will structure my business, even when things go back to quote unquote normal or our new normal.
right, right. I'm like, because there's normal is not a word I would be using
Normal's
yet.
no, yeah,
Not
it's
yet. I
there's
don't think we can introduce that back into society just yet, because, like,
mhm.
none of this is normal. I always tell them, like, we're in the middle of an election year. There's all of these elections
Yeah,
happening at local levels as well, and then you have, like, a social uprising, and,
absolutely.
like, you just keep adding these interesting components. Like, no one's talked about things that got lost. Like, I think some weird announcement from the government about UFOs at some point. It's just 2020 has been really interesting. I've
Yeah.
definitely eaten my weight in chocolate because of this as well. It's necessary. I find, like, it's medicinal almost. And yeah,
Yes.
so I would put you in that space, like, as an essential worker. I feel like chocolate is essential to a lot of the survival of the people at this point. So for someone who is a Black woman in this space, like,
Yes.
Oy, because you just don't see very many Black faces in the world of chocolate, especially like competition level where like they're creating massive sculptures that you can literally probably like live in. It's just, and occupy and set up residence and get mail at. But for you, like, what has that experience been like? Because I know it's not heavily dominated by, there's not, I mean, not even close to dominated by Black voices and Black faces and Black people. And so, to like know that the origins of the cacao itself and chocolate itself is like so deeply
Mm-hmm.
rooted in a lot of African history and indigenous history.
Absolutely.
Like for us, I find like, why don't more of us do this work? Because it so naturally falls into our space and it's so agriculturally connected to the rest of the world. And it's a product of it's an end product of a plant. And so like, what has your experience been like being kind of like the only brown person in the room of, for lack of a better analogy?
I have been a pastry chef for 10 years, but more specifically, I've been in the chocolate space for about the past 3 years. And I think I can say from the beginning of my career, you start your work. I'm in the restaurant. It's one of my first few days, my first weeks, and you're just kind of looking around, wondering when, okay, I'm just, looking for a few people that look like me just for some,
Right.
comfort level, or just seeing kind of how things are going here. And I quickly realized this industry is not full of people that look like me. It's just not. And so, you're looking for people who you think will mentor you, or people you just want to, have a chat with about what you're doing and how you're working and working in these tough environments and what it's been like, and you just don't see it. And I think that for me, I felt there were a lot of challenges, just especially in some of the more formal environments like Paris, working in some Paris kitchens, being at Cordon Bleu, and I would say working in the Michelin environment, the 2 Michelin environments that I did work in. I think that a lot of it was mental for me. So overcoming this hurdle of wondering, what are people, how am I being perceived by being the only one that looks like me working here? What are people thinking of me, and what are people's perceptions? And I quickly realized that I had to release some of that in order to be successful in those environments. I had to think about how I was going to excel every single day, how I
Wow.
was going to be kind of quote unquote undeniable. And I thought that technique was the only way to do that. Always be running, always moving fast, always yes chefing, always kind of just fitting into the system that they had already set in place so that I could get the information and the knowledge that I needed to be what I wanted to be. I think when people of color, Black people specifically, are in these spaces, you have to ask yourself, what do you want to get out of it? What's the end goal? And sometimes you realize you have to go into this relationship realizing I'm going to give them something, which is my hard work and, my dedication and everything that I've got. But what am I going to get back? I'm going to learn new techniques. I'm going to understand the inner workings of a large scale production. I'm going to take those things away from it all. But you do worry, how are people perceiving me? Are people thinking that I'm capable of cooking or preparing cuisine that's not quote unquote typical for me or for someone that looks like me? And you ask yourself, is it okay for me to be making French pastries, or or for someone who wants to make Italian food or anything? You're asking, is it okay for me to step into this space? Can I make this food authentically? Do people think I can create this authentically? And I think the idea behind all of that is just realizing that as Black people, we can do anything. It's up to
Right.
us. We can do food that speaks to something we had when we were young. We can do international. We can do anything and still put our spin on it, or just speak to it from a very technical way. And once you get to that point where you realize that it's up to me, I think you start to feel some freedom. But it definitely felt a way to kind of live Black and work Michelin. You'd feel that. You feel that 100%.
Wow. Now that idea of I guess for lack of a better term, it would be like appropriation. Like, when you sit in the kitchen, and I think people fail to remember, like, we're cooking from like French techniques. We're cooking really old, like French recipes, French sauces. If you have a very restaurant or very geographically specific restaurant, we're like, we're cooking from, like, we cook from recipes that are from like the south of Italy, and that, but your entire kitchen crew looks, pretty diverse
Mm-hmm.
considering, and it's like, no, it's not going to be like an entire Italian family in the back, in the kitchen, like, preparing
Exactly.
this meal for you. It's going to be a number of different types of people who might not share a specific genetic makeup. And so, like, that idea of appropriation is definitely one of those things that we don't escape it any more than anyone else does. But I think because of the origins of our existence in the country, around slavery, we didn't have a choice but to appropriate those foods in order to do our jobs. And so we're used to kind of taking what's in front of us, no matter where it's from, no matter where it's based, and having to turn it into something. And so it's oh, let me get this fire truck a minute to blow by here. I'm like, what is going on now? Okay, I think we know, friends. I think we know you're out here and you're doing it. You're doing it. Okay, there we go. So like to that point of like origins and coming back to, like the geographical home of a lot of the ingredients that we have to work with every day. Have you been able to like touch base or check in with kind of the origins of chocolate, and has any of that like influenced any of your work, that where the whole where it's from and who was making it, hundreds or thousands of years ago, and how it found its way to North America. So have you been able to like trace any kind of like African history, or have a story to tell based on that history, that has kind of influenced your food? Because I know, like, you're surrounded by a lot of other cultures and a lot of other countries when you're producing food for a restaurant or for clients. And so, like, to kind of find that space in yourself on your own history and your own ancestry, has that had any impact on your work?
It's definitely something that I think about. And I definitely went through this long period where, you do a lot of research about, cacao, the cacao seed and where it comes from and best places it comes from and, how it's harvested. And I mean, you do start to look at areas like, like Ivory Coast and all these places who are actually producing some of the best cacao seeds and, the raw product that we actually eventually get to use into our chocolate. And I can't say that I've actually had the opportunity to, even go to those places, but I can say that I've done a lot of research, and I definitely think that there should be more talk about the producers and where things kind of originate, and like you said, geographically, how that should relate back to our end product. But
Yeah.
I can't say that that's been a large part of just my process. My process, really, like I said, with chocolate, I didn't even really get deep into chocolate until I was made head chocolatier of a restaurant, and I was like, oh, okay, yeah,
All right,
okay,
I'll figure this out, I guess. Okay.
I'm gonna do that. But I definitely, you spend a lot of time, reading about the origin of the product, and there are some times, you do kind of raise your eyebrow and just say, why don't we talk about this more? We spend so much
Mhm.
time talking about, the final product, which is this small bonbon that I've manipulated 100 times over, but we never talked about how we got to the fève, the one piece of
Right.
chocolate that I used to melt down to create all of these things. We never talk about all the work that went into, making of this product, which I'm glad to see that a lot of makers are starting to kind of get on the map, and we're starting to see more recognition. But there's definitely a lot more work in the industry to do with, fair trade and acknowledgement in general, and how that will eventually affect our end process. But I do think as we see more Black chocolatiers in the industry, hopefully as a group, we will help to make that transition and shift that focus, which will also translate into us producing things that are relevant to those areas.
Right. Now, the talking about like fair trade and sourcing, what is your current, like, how are you sourcing beans now? Are you are you starting from like that point, or are you just are you getting the everything already processed in and then you're going from that point? So yeah, so like what's the word I'm looking for, your supply chain looks like right now?
So for me, I don't do anything regarding like bean to bar. So
Okay.
that's not a process with the space that I have. I wouldn't even be able to do it at this point. I think it's something that getting larger, I would like to see myself producing my own chocolate, and then having the ability to source and using my dollar power to say, I'm going to buy from this from this area, and there's fair trade, and I'm happy with the supply process. But right now, I just look to purchase the best quality chocolate that I can get my hands on. And there's some local chocolate, but for the most part, I use Valrhona and sometimes Michel Cuiseau.
Oh, okay. All right. Is there for the folks who aren't aware or are a little uneducated about chocolate and like types of chocolate, qualities of chocolate, um, give me like the quickest breakdown, like the quickest like down and dirty breakdown you can give me about like chocolate when people are going in to purchase chocolate, what they should be looking for, how the different percentages work, and then kind of a general idea of like when you're buying chocolate off the shelf, like an M&M or a Snickers, compared to something you would find in like your shop with your service. Like, what are those big differences for people? I think strangely enough, when I was in culinary school, I worked for Godiva Chocolate in one of their retail
Mm-hmm.
locations. So it was like a really like quick and dirty education. However, it was interesting enough for me to keep asking questions. And I think a lot
Yeah.
of my later on, like my experience with customers is me talking about like the origins of chocolate and the things that they're tasting, and why, why they taste what how they why they taste what they taste like, and why like the process of tempering is important and all those things. And so I spent some time, at least around it, but not nearly, it's probably enough information that I have gleaned to like make a more intensely informed choice. But I do try to like, I count myself a little more educated as far as like standing in front of a selection and going, oh, this makes sense to me, I think I understand what's happening here. So yeah, give the people a
Absolutely.
quick tutorial on like how to pick a good chocolate and like explaining what those differences are.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, to start, we can talk about percentages. So I think a lot of people are wondering, why are they telling, what is this percentage on this bar, or why would I need to know this information? And the quickest way to kind of look at percentages is kind of the lower the percentage, the less of the actual raw product that you have. So you're going to have more additives. So let's say, from the scale of 0 to 100, 100% is going to be completely unsweetened, no additives. It's just chocolate that is completely, there are no additives. So it's going to be no sweetener, no anything like that. As you go lower all the way down, let's say you have a 40% chocolate. So that's going to be a milk chocolate. You've added more things, additives and sugars and sweeteners to give you that different flavor profile. So that's kind of how you look at the percentages, and whether you're going from a light chocolate to a dark chocolate, or a sweet chocolate to a not sweet chocolate. Regarding kind of the flavor profiles, chocolate is very much like coffee, in the sense that the soil is going to speak to the acidity and the fruitiness and all those little small notes that you'll get. So depending on what area that those cacao seeds came from is going to tell you a lot about how your chocolate in the final taste is going to taste. Basically, when you go to a artisan chocolatier or somebody who's making bonbons, the difference in what you're seeing there is somebody who has taken chocolate. They'll choose a percentage, and they have to hand temper it, and they're adding a lot of additives and creating kind of a specialty product, just
Hmm.
putting a lot of TLC into that one product, as opposed to kind of when you're buying Hershey's, it's a very mass produced product that it's still delicious for a lot of people, but when you're going to a small chocolate shop, you're really paying for a lot of attention to detail, a lot of specific techniques. You're not going to have a product that's full of a ton of preservatives. So I know my bonbons can't sit on shelves for ages. They have all very fresh ingredients that require you to eat it within a very short period of time. So you're kind of paying for something that's real, that's natural, that was handcrafted just for you. And then you have the extra benefit of kind of the beauty of it, whether it's hand painted or specially molded into individual shapes that have been chosen, by the chocolatier. So it's just kind of all those little things. And when you're going to purchase at any chocolate shop, you should be making sure everything is shiny. Chocolate should always be very shiny. They should have a good snap, which means the temper was done very well. I know for me personally, I still temper all of my chocolate by hand. I don't use any
Oh, wow.
machines. Yeah, so I will melt down sometimes 6 or 7 kilos of chocolate, and I will temper
Ooh.
it, and I will be maintaining that bowl of chocolate throughout the entire day with no machines, no anything. So it's you're paying for a lot of experience and for someone to really keep a really close eye and that like really specific attention to detail to get something that's really precise. And not to say that you can't do that with the machine, because you definitely can, but I like to kind of go the old school route for now,
Yeah.
just to kind of baby the chocolate. So yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I feel the same way about like meringues and whipped creams. I still do them by hand I just like the connection. Um,
Yeah.
with that in mind and like understanding where like, the basics of chocolate for most people, it's one of those things where it's hard to think about how something like that evolves and like kind of keeps refreshing itself and becoming new. So
Mm-hmm.
what trends are you seeing around like what's being made, ingredients that are being used, what can we like expect in the next few years around like this idea of like what flavors are happening and how people are approaching chocolate at this point?
I think the biggest thing that we're seeing is actually, the hand painting, which is something that's pretty new. This idea that chocolate doesn't have to just be brown. So I think that's kind of, the movement that people are in now, is that they can be all different colors using different molds so that you're getting different shapes. Just kind of having this visually striking image that we're not necessarily used to when you would go to a classic chocolate shop. I also think that we're trying to kind of get more components into one bite. So a lot of things we're seeing now is, how we can have one bonbon with, 4 or 5 layers, and how we can kind of get the whole idea of a plated dessert into one bite. So I think you're going to see a lot more of that moving forward, just hyper seasonality, which you don't always kind of equate to chocolate because it's being made by artisans and chocolate makers who are, pastry chefs and also chocolatiers. So they're kind of merging these two worlds. So I think a lot of that. I know me personally, I try not to focus too much on the trends. I try to focus on just what's at the end of the day yummy and really
Right.
delicious, because I do think that there is room to quote unquote just do too much.
Mm.
And I think sometimes if you're not careful, if you're sometimes doing too much, you forget about kind of the spirit behind chocolatiering and how it all started, and how some of those really classic cordials and confections are just very delicious at their core. So I try not to do anything that's so in the moment that it kind of messes with the technique and results in something that's maybe more beautiful than it is delicious. So that's something that I always try to kind of focus on, because the most important thing is that it's delicious.
I mean, that is a life philosophy as well, to not just focus on these aesthetics. It needs to taste good.
It needs to
Like
taste
just it
good.
has to taste good, guys. Like that is like the lesson to take home with you is it has to taste good. Um,
It has to taste good. And I honestly think as I'm growing in my career, I'm learning more and more is that it's okay to be simple as well. I mean, at the
mm.
beginning of my career, I was always wanting to just put so many things on the plate. I want to show every person, every technique
Oh, good
that
lord, that's
I can
exhausting.
do.
Oh my god,
It's
that's exhausting. Yes.
especially in pastry, you're like, oh, well, I can add a twill. Oh, I can add a chocolate decor. Oh, I can add some sauce here. And it's just, as I get more confident and more mature and more just kind of confident to just say what I want to say and do what I want to do, I'm totally fine putting, 2 things on a plate, 3 things on a plate, and saying, listen, eat these 3 things. It'll be the best 3 things you've had. Just,
Right.
I know that these 3 things work together and that you're going to enjoy them. it's just about having a level of confidence. So I think that translates to sometimes, simplicity is also really beautiful.
Exactly, exactly. And it's just like, oh, the simple things, just they really honestly just don't have anything to hide behind. And so for me, I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, if you are confident in your talent, and even in an effort to get better at it, like serve it as simple as possible because that feedback is so authentic on the other side of it because there's no real, no one has to like overcomplicate what's in front of you, and they can give you a response to it in the most genuine way possible because they're not trying to work by like 9 layers of something weird that they don't understand, and they don't know how it's going to taste, but like something super simple like really allows you to connect so quickly with what's happening on a plate and what's happening in in a presentation of anything. It's just like, okay, simplify that,
Absolutely.
edit yourself, feel
No
free
ingredients,
to
just for
edit.
shock value. Exactly.
Exactly. I'm just like, we want to build a long-term relationship here, and I'm not going to show you all the goods up front. Like, let's just, let's move our way into this a little slowly.
So well put.
Oh my
Exactly.
God. For like going forward into the future, of course, like thinking about like the fact that you just started, and it's like, oh, I have to already consider like, okay, what does this look like in just the next few months? But to fast forward into like 3 years or 5 years where we have found a new way to live and a new way to work. Do you have any ambitions that far out that you've been thinking about? Like, where do you want to take your brand, and what do you want it to do, and how do you want it to impact the rest of the world?
I think about all those things very regularly because when you're starting a brand, you never know where it's going to go. So I want to make sure that even as small as it is now, that it has core values, it has a mission statement, and that I know where I'm trying to go. So as I bring more people on, they can share in that philosophy with me, and they can make sure that they want to go in the same direction. So for me, I mean, in the near future, I'm definitely looking to just create a very small, focused boutique that only features chocolate. Just so people can come in and just see a visually striking image of really cute, colorful, bright bonbons that they can choose from. Beyond that, I do think I'll probably tap into pastry, maybe seeing some pastry projects going on and moving forward. And then I think even more so just socially and in the times we're in, I've really been thinking about what is my platform? What can I do with my platform?
Mm,
What am I going to do with what skills that I have? And I really think that it's very important to start to portray images of more people that look like me, Black people doing things that I've done, because I'm really, I don't want people to say, oh, wow, it's so unique that you did that. Or, oh,
right.
wow, you went to Paris. And I'm like, well, yeah, a lot of people have.
But people go to Paris
Um,
now. Like, it's cool.
you may be startled because I'm telling you I went there, or that I worked in a Michelin restaurant, and I want, for the next generation, I want them to do it way better than I did it. I want it to be a new normal. I want young people to be able to read stories and look at things of, people of color doing extraordinary things in the industry. And if that's what you choose to do, if that's what you want to do, it's completely okay to do that. So just trying to get some imagery and some things out, just encouraging people to pursue any dream and to take it however far they want to take it, whether that's opening a soul food restaurant, whether that's working in a Michelin restaurant, whether that's having your own spice company or opening your own chocolate factory, whatever it is. I think there needs to not be this kind of wall of insecurity that I know I had going into it, because there's so many levels of things and reasons why, you hesitate, and I want people to not hesitate. So definitely just moving forward with that social image and seeing what platforms I can use to just kind of create a new normal in my community. And starting in the community is probably just, how I'll focus on moving forward, just with my business, growing my business, and kind of growing my social message.
I love it. Because the education component is so important, and of course, bringing on new talent and bringing people into your space once you've gotten large enough to like actually support like employees and interns and things like that. What can we do, right now for young people who are like paying attention and they're like, I want to be in food, but I don't want to be in food at any of these capacities. And then they discover what you do and it makes sense for them. What path, what can you help them with, or what can you tell them to do, like kind of in the path or in the process of getting there?
I think the biggest thing is to take the risk of, if you see something you want to do, is just taking the time to commit to it. Really, I mean, for a young person, really deciding, is this what I really want to do? And if you see, let's say someone who's a chocolatier and you see they're making bright and colorful chocolates and saying, okay, I want to learn how to do that. Do your research first. Do your research
Mm,
about what a career looks like, what this industry looks like, what the hours look like, what the dedication and commitment look like, how that will affect your social life, and then ask yourself, are you willing to go down that road? And if you say yes to all of those things, start knocking on doors.
okay.
You have to start knocking on doors. I'm looking forward to when I have a space where I can not only open my door, but seek out, these young people who want to learn these things and get these skills. But you have got to be fully committed to giving up, I think, sometimes a little, some social norms, not hanging out on Saturday night, because if you're in the restaurant, you're in the restaurant, or, having to give up some of those things, but diving very deep, studying your craft. And like I said, getting into those places where they'll begin to train you. And unfortunately, sometimes it is, using your free time just to get your foot into the door and that turning into a major position. But it definitely takes a level of ambition and a lot of no's, because a
Yeah.
lot of people have told me no. And I think sometimes no's can be really hard, especially when you walk on a door and when they open that door, no one looks like you, and then they shut it and tell you no. You feel like, well, it's just not for me. No, it's
Yeah.
for you. But you just have to figure out who's going to get you through the door. Because where I started, there were not people that looked like me, and they were not expecting me to do well. But going back to, when you make yourself undeniable, when you're that person who they tell you, I remember being at, per se, and they tell you, you can enter the kitchen at 5:30. Well, when you're outside at 5:15 waiting to be let in, with all of your notes on how you're going to approach your day, you begin to become somebody where they say, we know what, this person, we got to work with them because they're producing the best, or they're giving it their best. And that's the type of people we want to work with. So really just push yourself, push yourself, push yourself. And that's the nature of this industry. And so young people should be prepared to just really be ready to give it 100%.
Yeah, and that's, across the board, ladies and gentlemen, not just in your physical execution, but in your mind. Like your mentals have definitely have to be in a space of like 100%. And anyone who has worked in this industry knows like that can be taxing and fatiguing and exhausting and tiring.
A
But
thousand
there's,
percent.
there is a slight madness to the job that you tap into that other people just aren't aware of. I mean, I've on numerous occasions tried to explain what I do for a living to people and like the rigors of it, and they're just looking at you like, why would anyone do that? You're just like, but I love my work so much. You don't understand. It's insanity, I promise you. Um, so like this, and God, an hour flies by so fast. So like these last few moments, I'm like, geez, I'll give you two questions and then you can answer those and then we'll kind of wrap up from there.
Yeah,
The
sure.
first one is, how is your work, your current work, an expression of who you are? And like what can people learn from like having a bonbon? What can people learn from like engaging with you? And then the second question is like, how can we support you? We know it's a new venture. We know we're in an odd place right now and you really can't like, yes, buy all the things, guys, come visit and all that. Like that might not be possible, but like what can we be doing for you so that like after all of this, being in this moment doesn't feel like you lost ground at all, but like that you're able to kind of not just pick up where you left off, but really move ahead and charge ahead even faster than you anticipated because you have all this like momentum and support behind you.
Yeah, so I think when people have something from me, or what they'll learn when they have something from me, is just kind of just my story, just this merger of just wanting to do something that's just super authentic, super clean, super focused, And just seeing how basically so many experiences can lead to just me giving you something that is not only delicious and visually striking, but just very personal. I think people will kind of feel a personal sentiment in how everything is made, because, you know, every single thing is hand painted. So in a day when I'm making 1,200 bonbons, you know, I've painted every single one. It was a unique idea. So I
Wow.
think you kind of, yeah. So I think you kind of feel that. And I would hope that people just feel that they're a part of supporting, you know, a Black owned chocolatier, which is a really unique thing, and hopefully becoming less and less unique as we get more people trained in the chocolatiering industry. But I mean, regards to how people can support, like, I have a website right now. It's definitely a work in progress. And right now I'm moving towards shipping. So
Okay.
hopefully within the next few weeks, when people go on petiteseur.com, they will be able to order chocolates to be sent out to them around the country, which is the goal within the next few weeks. I just recently did kind of a cookie pop-up, which is kind of funny because that's what I was eating the most during quarantine. When I was like inside, I'm making sablés and eating sablés, and people are now asking me to make them sablés. So they'll also see some fun sablés that I've been shipping with people's chocolates. But most importantly, I just hope that while there's kind of been this shift of people, for whatever reason, and which is supported, to shop Black owned, and which has been really beautiful seeing people wanting to kind of come out and support Black owned businesses. I'm hoping that when people, however they get to me, why they came to my website, once they order from me, that I can give them an outstanding customer service experience and an outstanding product that was beautifully packaged and, you know, timely, and that people can stay then for that reason. They
Absolutely.
may have come to me because I'm a Black owned business and they found me on a list, but I'm hoping people see that within these Black owned businesses they're supporting, they're getting a beautiful and delicious product from so many companies. I mean, people are realizing that there's so many small companies who maybe they didn't have the advertising, or that they didn't have, you know, this huge platform. But once you support them, you'll see you're there for a reason. You're there because they're making something so delicious. And I'm hoping that people will see that there's more to just shopping Black owned in a trend. It's something that we can be doing moving forward, because they are great
Mm.
products made by Black people.
Agreed. Agreed. So, and your website, and are you on? I know you're on Instagram. Is it the same
Yes.
handle for Instagram?
Yes. So on my Instagram is at PETITESOEURDC.
Okay.
So on my Instagram, there's a link to my website, which my Instagram is my main kind of form of advertising. People mostly hit me up on Instagram. So always, you know, people can feel free to do that. But
Okay.
ordering will be going through my website.
That is all for this week's episode. Thank you to our guests for spending some time with us, and thank you for listening in and for being a part of the Flyest Click in podcasting. If you love these conversations, be sure to download, subscribe, comment, and share. You can get further connected with the Afros and Knives community by following us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And don't forget to visit our website, afrosandknives.com, and sign up for our newsletter. Afros and Knives does this work only with the financial support of our Patreon community. To become a patron, please visit patreon.com/afrosandknives and pledge your monthly support. We are working on expanding into video as well as offering patron-only content this year, and you don't want to miss out. Until next week, may you be happy, may you be safe, may you be healthy, may you be at peace.